Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show. And I wanted to start off with a story about China, which is rather shocking, but actually it's not shocking at all. There was an intelligence leak from the West, from the Five Eyes, which was reported on by Australia's Daily Telegraph newspaper. The headline, Coronavirus, New South Wales dossier lays out case against China bat virus program. China deliberately suppressed or destroyed evidence of the coronavirus outbreak in an assault on international transparency that cost tens of thousands of lives, according to a dossier prepared by concerned Western governments on the COVID-19 contagion. The 15-page research document obtained by the Saturday Telegraph lays the foundation for the case of negligence being mounted against China. It states that to the endangerment of other countries, the Chinese government covered up news of the virus by silencing or disappearing doctors who spoke out, destroying evidence of it in laboratories, and refusing to provide live samples to international scientists who are working on a vaccine. It can also be revealed that the Australian government trained and funded a team of Chinese scientists who belonged to a laboratory which went on to genetically modify deadly coronaviruses that could be transmitted from bats to humans and had no cure, and is now the subject of a probe into the origins of COVID-19. As intelligence agencies investigate whether the virus inadvertently leaked from a Wuhan laboratory, the team and its research, led by scientist Shi Zhengli, feature in the dossier prepared by Western governments. It cites their work discovering samples of coronavirus from a cave in the Yunnan province with striking genetic similarity to COVID-19, along with their research synthesizing a bat-derived coronavirus that could not be treated. Its major themes include the deadly denial of human-to-human transmission, the silencing or disappearing of doctors and scientists who spoke out, the destruction of evidence of the virus from genomic studies laboratories, and the bleaching of wildlife market stalls, along with the refusal to provide live virus samples to international scientists working on a vaccine. Now, I should mention here that we've been told that any talk about this virus being modified in the Wuhan laboratory, that this was a bonkers conspiracy theory. Apparently it's not a bonkers conspiracy theory. And of course, who was the person who outsourced American research on monster germs to Wuhan laboratory and provided U.S. funding, which was kept up until last month? That would be the sainted Dr. Anthony Fauci. Key figures of the Wuhan Institute of Virology team who feature in the government dossier were either trained or employed in the CSIRO's government Australian Animal Health Laboratory, where they conducted foundational research on deadly pathogens in live bats, including SARS, as part of an ongoing partnership between the CSIRO and the Chinese Academy of Sciences. This partnership continues to this day, according to the website of the Wuhan Institute, despite concerns the research is too risky. Despite concerns, the research is too risky. The COVID-19 panic, I suppose, could be seen as the apotheosis of science, but it's clear to me, as I'm sure it is to many others, that science needs to be taken down a peg or two or three, or maybe even more. Because why are they doing this? Because they can? I think that's the reason. Because they can. Let's genetically modify killer viruses to make them even deadlier, because why? Why would anyone do that? Politicians in the Morrison government are speaking out about the national security and biosecurity concerns of this relationship as the controversial research into bat-related viruses now comes into sharp focus amid the investigation by the Five Eyes intelligence agencies of the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. In Wuhan, in China's Hubei province, not far from the now infamous Wuhan wet market, Dr. Shi and her team work in high protective gear in level 3 and level 4 biocontainment laboratories studying deadly bat-derived coronaviruses. At least one of the estimated 50 virus samples Dr. Shi has in her laboratory is a 96% genetic match to COVID-19. When Dr. Shi heard the news about the outbreak of a new pneumonia-like virus, she spoke about the sleepless nights she suffered worrying whether it was her lab that was responsible for the outbreak. As she told Scientific American in an article published this week, could they have come from our lab? Since her initial fears, Dr. Shi has satisfied herself the genetic sequence of COVID-19 did not match any her lab was studying. Well, that's very convenient, isn't it? Yet, given the extent of the People's Republic of China's lies, obfuscations, and angry refusal to allow any investigation into the origin of the outbreak, her laboratory is now being closely looked at by international intelligence agencies. The Australian government's position is the virus most likely originated in the Wuhan wet market, but that there is a remote possibility, a 5% chance it accidentally leaked from the laboratory. Yes, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because now we know that the Australian government was insane enough to take part in the creation of monster germs in Wuhan, China, a country which is not exactly known for its painstaking safety or responsibility. The Western government's research paper confirms this. It notes a 2013 study conducted by a team of researchers, including Dr. Shi, who collected a sample of horseshoe bat feces from a cave in Yunnan province, which was later found to contain a virus of 96.2% identical to the SARS-CoV-2, the virus that caused COVID-19. The research dossier also references work done by the team to synthesize SARS-like coronaviruses to analyze whether they could be transmissible from bats to mammals. This means they were altering parts of the virus to test whether it was transmissible to different species. So you see, this story goes back and forth, that it seems likely that it was created in the laboratory. No, only a 5% chance. But no, actually, synthesizing was done in this laboratory. The potential to prepare for and mitigate future outbreaks must be weighed against the risk of creating more dangerous pathogens, these scientists wrote. Yeah, how about that? You have to be a scientist to understand it, but below is the line that the government's research paper references from the study. To examine the emergence potential, that is the potential to infect humans, of circulating bat CoVs, we built a chimeric virus encoding a novel zoonotic CoV spike protein from the, and I'm going to try to pronounce this sequence, that was isolated from Chinese horseshoe bats in the context of the SARS-CoV mouse-adapted backbone. Well, that sounds like a good use of American tax dollars, doesn't it? No, Australian tax dollars. And not just those countries. The Daily Telegraph of Australia had, well, they printed this on May the 2nd from Tim Blair. China lied, 240,380 updated have died, and that was from 3 days ago. China wants to stall or avoid altogether any investigation into the origins of their Wuhan flu, but a dossier now reveals the West is wise to China's delaying tactics and much more beside. China deliberately suppressed or destroyed evidence of the coronavirus outbreak in an assault on international transparency, as I quoted earlier. Its major themes include the deadly denial of human-to-human transmission, bleaching of wildlife, market stalls, endangerment of other countries. The U.S.'s position, according to reports this week, is that it is more likely the virus leaked from a laboratory, but it could also have come from a wet market. According to the Daily Mail, President Donald Trump says China made a horrible mistake and tried to cover up the coronavirus outbreak. Hours after Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed there was an enormous evidence that COVID-19 escaped a Wuhan lab. He said there's evidence to prove that China misled the global community over the severity of COVID-19, and the nation didn't want to admit their mistake. He said government is working on a very conclusive report on the virus's origin. Earlier Sunday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said there's enormous evidence. A DHS report obtained Sunday revealed U.S. officials believe China intentionally concealed the severity of the pandemic and hoarded medical supplies. Well, we know this for a fact, that they sent out the word to their consulates around the world, including consulates in Canada, that they were in bad trouble, and so their Canadian allies, the overseas Chinese, as the Communist Party of Canada tells them, that it was their duty to hoover up all personal protective equipment and have it sent to China. And Canada allowed this to happen. In fact, Canada gave China how many? 16 tons of PPE? That is a remarkable fact. Absolutely remarkable fact. And perhaps we should have an investigation into that, because, the initial line from the World Health Organization coming from the CPC was not a big deal. And Canada's chief medical officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, who coincidentally was born in Hong Kong, said, no, not a big deal. Not a big deal at all. Measures such as stopping airline flights, no. Xenophobic, racist. Racism is the big problem. And then, of course, Canada finds itself shortly thereafter with a grave lack of PPE, and Dr. Theresa Tam's position has shifted 180 degrees, and Canada has to be closed down forever over a disease that she told us was not really a threat. Trump claimed everybody, including Dr. Fauci, told him coronavirus was going to be no big deal after he closed the border with China. Nancy Pelosi was a month later saying it was going to pass. Everybody, even Tony Fauci, was saying it's going to pass, not going to be a big deal, Trump said on Sunday night. You will remember that in March, Fauci said, you want to go on a cruise? Not a problem. It's amazing how scientists, or scientific bureaucrats at any rate, can get away with this sort of thing, of just being disastrously wrong, just as Dr. Fauci was disastrously wrong about the threat of AIDS to heterosexuals. And I don't know, it's as if he didn't screw up at all. The Guardian, everyone is reporting on this story. So the attempts to contain this story about the Wuhan lab have clearly failed. Apparently, it's not a bonkers conspiracy theory. Not at all. Here's a story from Zero Hedge. An internal report presented to Chinese President Xi Jinping and other top leaders concludes that global anti-China sentiment is at a level not since the 1989 Tiananmen Square crackdown, and recommends preparing for a worst-case scenario of armed conflict with the United States, according to Reuters, citing people familiar with the content of the document. The report, created by the China Institutes of Contemporary Internal Relations, which is affiliated with the Ministry of State Security, suggests that the wave of anti-China sentiment is led by the United States, which sees China's rise as a global superpower as a threat to Western democracies. According to Reuters, one of those with knowledge of the report said it was regarded by some in the Chinese intelligence community as China's version of the Novikov telegram, a 1946 dispatch by the Soviet ambassador to Washington that stressed the dangers of U.S. economic and military ambition in the wake of World War II. Novikov's missive was a response to U.S. diplomat George Kennan's long telegram from Moscow that said the Soviet Union did not see the possibility for peaceful coexistence with the West, and that containment was the best long-term strategy. Reuters, which hadn't seen the paper, couldn't determine to what extent the report's grim outlook reflects positions held by China's state leaders, nor how much it might influence policy. That said, it suggests Beijing is taking the threat of global backlash over the coronavirus pandemic, which Western intelligence agencies suspect originated at a Wuhan biolab, which was experimenting with the bat coronavirus, and had previous concerns raised over the pandemic potential of such research. Yes, we know for a fact that 2 years ago, U.S. diplomats toured lab, and they sent reports to the State Department, which are quite worrisome, citing a fear over safety practices there. and the possibility of these viruses escaping from the lab. President Trump in recent days has been ratcheting up criticism of Beijing while threatening new tariffs on China. His administration has been considering retaliatory measures over the outbreak, according to the report, which warns that anti-China sentiment could also threaten their Belt and Road infrastructure initiatives, and that Washington could take advantage by offering financial and military support for regional allies, which would in turn make the security situation in Asia more volatile. On Monday, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said that President Trump is reviewing options to penalize China, adding that he expects Beijing to meet their obligations under the Phase 1 trade deal. As Reuters notes, China's Xi has shaped the country's military into a fighting force equipped to win modern wars, expanding air and naval capabilities and reach in a challenge to over 70 years of U.S. dominance in Asia. China's foreign ministry is now calling for peace and cooperation, saying the sound and steady development of China-U.S. relations are in the best interest of both countries and the international community, and that any words or actions that engage in political manipulation or stigmatization under the pretext of the pandemic, including taking the opportunity to sow discord between countries, are not conducive to international cooperation against the pandemic. China, meanwhile, announced they will cut off funding for the World Health Organization for being very China-centric. And while the world focuses on China's response to the virus, Australia, where two scientists from the Wuhan Institute conducted coronavirus experiments overseas, has called for an international investigation. Yes, the Chinese are calling for cooperation, but I guess it would be cooperation, well, just do what China says. You know, a shocking thing has happened, that respectable people in the West, including those two law professors in the Atlantic, have been telling us that what this disaster teaches us is that we need to become more like China. Civil rights have no place in the new normal. Censorship will become universal, because this is literally a matter of life and death, and so we cannot have dissent. Alex Berenson said on Twitter today that he was worried about being kicked off the platform. And of course, any of us who express a skepticism about this panic, well, I guess we have to seriously worry about whether we're going to be kicked off YouTube and or Twitter. This is also from Reuters. China has published a short animation titled "Once Upon a Virus," mocking the U.S. response to the new coronavirus using Lego-like figures to represent the two countries. Washington and Beijing are locked in a war of words over the origins of the disease. In an animation posted online by China's official Xinhua news agency, red curtains opened to reveal a stage featuring Lego-like figures in the form of a terracotta warrior wearing a face mask and the Statue of Liberty. "We discovered a new virus," says the warrior. "So what?" replies the Statue of Liberty. "It's only a flu." As the warrior issues warnings about the virus and counts off the grim milestones in China's outbreak, the Statue of Liberty replies dismissively with echoes of Trump's press conference, in which he played down the severity of the illness. "Are you listening to yourselves?" asks the warrior, as the statue begins to turn red with fever and gets hooked up to an intravenous drip. "We are always correct, even though we contradict ourselves," the statue replies. This is what psychologists call projection. "That's what I love about you Americans, your consistency," says the warrior. Since its April 29th release on Xinhua's official YouTube channel, New China TV, the video has been viewed more than 960,000 times and was retweeted by some Chinese diplomats. Both YouTube and Twitter are blocked in China, although China's diplomats have increasingly taken to global social media platforms to broadcast their messages. The U.S. has accused China of misleading the world about the severity of the outbreak. Social media reaction to the video was mixed. Twitter user, some stupid name, agreed with the video's messaging, saying U.S. follies bemuse no one anymore. Again, I was talking last week about their use of language. U.S. follies bemuse no one anymore. They're just incapable of natural speech. But some comments came with the hashtag China lied, people died, or show Chinese President Xi Jinping in a variety of virus-related visuals. Others were scathing about the Chinese Communist Party. Clever propaganda. Where is the bit where the CCP covered it up and publicly shamed a hero doctor who then died? Along with clips of English-language Xinhua video news stories, New China TV has previously uploaded publicity videos, such as one of children of different ethnicities singing praises of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Lego said it was not involved in the animation. So what other country was stupid enough to get involved with the Wuhan laboratory? Stupid enough? I don't know. Criminal enough? EU Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier authorized the creation of the secretive Wuhan lab when he was France's foreign secretary as part of a cooperation deal with China, the Daily Express reveals. Yeah, France was involved in this too. What is wrong with these people? Seriously, what is wrong with them? I mean, what's the worst case scenario? Okay, we're going to make monster germs in a Chinese laboratory, and what's the worst case scenario? That it gets out, and that we're told that this is so deadly that our economies have to be shut down, so we get, what, 25, 30% out of work? The borrowing of trillions and trillions of dollars, which can certainly not be paid back. Yeah, that's the worst case scenario. But I don't know. I just think these people are absolute maniacs. The $44 million laboratory was first planned by China's Academy of Sciences in 2003 as one of the World Health Organization's reference labs. According to this story, the United States intelligence community and intelligence community, they're both capitalized. There's no such thing as the United States intelligence community. Also stated they had ruled out the possibility that the virus had been man-made or genetically modified. You see this war going on in these news stories. Because, I don't know, this would look really bad. It would look really bad for the Australian government and for certainly Dr. Anthony Fauci and for the French government and probably for the Canadian government too, because we had those Chinese people fired from a laboratory in Winnipeg and frog marched out the door last year. So China wants peace and cooperation. Yeah, maybe they do. This is a story from the LA Times. The newscast blares from a television set in a Beijing apartment, carrying through an open window and echoing across the compound. The refrain is the same every evening: praise for China's handling of the coronavirus, dire scenes from foreign hospitals, and condemnations of the United States. The tone is often withering. Last week, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was declared the public enemy of humanity. A few nights later, the anchor feigned sympathy for Americans, who she said were left to die while their government railed against China. Beijing has pushed this storyline at home for months, a mixture of self-congratulation for defeating the virus, denial of central government missteps, and horror at other countries' failures to contain the pandemic. Now facing escalating international criticism over its handling of the outbreak and growing demands for an investigation into its origins, China has taken its strident nationalist message abroad. The strategy is provoking a backlash and colliding with President Trump's insistence that China covered up the danger of the pathogen. The undiplomatic invective matches the swagger of Xi Jinping's China, which is richer and more influential than ever, and determined to shape the global narrative as it believes a superpower should, especially as Xi confronts the biggest crisis of his tenure. Beijing sees itself as ascendant at a time that the United States' stature as a world leader is ebbing. And again, it just seems a remarkable coincidence to me. I mean, it's not like it was planned or anything like that, that all these people are stepping forward and saying, yes, we in the West must be more like China. Oh, you know, all that talk about liberty and freedom, pursuit of happiness and all that, no, those days are over. We need central control over all opinions because it's literally life and death. Chinese ambassadors are attacking foreign officials on social media and peddling misinformation. There's that word again, amplified by the state-controlled press to deflect blame for the virus that has killed 250,000 people and wrecked global economies. The latest spat erupted last week after the Chinese ambassador to Australia appeared to threaten a consumer boycott over Australia's call for an independent inquiry into the outbreak. The Australian government accused Beijing, its biggest trading partner, of economic coercion. China denied it and warned Canberra to stop playing political games. The editor of Global Times, a popular tabloid run by the Chinese Communist Party, weighed in on Weibo, a Chinese social media platform, comparing Australia to gum stuck to the bottom of China's shoe. Sometimes you have to find a rock and scrape it off. Rising to China's defense is a generation of diplomats and pundits dubbed the Wolf Warriors, after a recent pair of blockbuster action films featuring a muscled, globe-trotting Chinese commando who vanquishes Asian drug lords, African pirates, and mercenaries led by a villainous American named Big Daddy. The diplomats' fields of battle are social media platforms, usually Twitter and Facebook, which are banned in China. Their weapons include outrage, sarcasm, an abiding suspicion of Western governments and the press, conspiracy theories, and it seems the support of the Chinese leadership. And I think there was a particularly choice insult here. Put on a mask and shut up. This is China's response to Australia. Venezuelan. The Chinese embassy in Venezuela ended an angry Twitter thread, which began by complaining about Venezuelan officials referring to the Chinese coronavirus. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Other countries shouldn't blame China for mistakes they have made themselves, particularly the US, tweeted the Chinese ambassador to the Netherlands. Offensive and gratuitous to some, but the Global Times in a recent article said that China's people are no longer satisfied with a flaccid diplomatic tone. Where did they learn English? We got racism here. The star among the Wolf Warriors is Zhao Lijin, a 47-year-old recently installed as a deputy spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Ministry. Zhao came to prominence last year when, as the number 2 in the Chinese embassy in Pakistan, he got into a Twitter feud with former U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice, who called him a racist disgrace. Well, COVID-19 has got intersectional. I thought that the Chinese were looking for, cooperation, peace and cooperation. Insulting every other country on earth? Perhaps not so wise. Let's have a look at the chat. Happy Dead Tito Day, says Jonathan Paul. Even Waugh, the novelist, he served in the British Army in a mission in Yugoslavia, 1944, 1945, and he spread this rumor that Tito was actually a woman, was a lesbian. And news of this got back to Tito, and apparently he angrily confronted Waugh and asked him why he thought that he was a woman. Okay, Don from Beyond says, in my area near Daytona, the Chinese restaurants are beginning to open again. I think they were worried about being victims of hate crimes for a while there. Yako Raipala says, good evening. Of course, the reason why they took the research to China was because they wanted to get around Western safety standards, so they were more evil than insane. David Wright asked, does the West still have standards? Let's see. 16 tons is a lot of masks and gloves. Actually, it wasn't tons, it was tons, which is the ridiculous word that we have here in Canada, and that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. It's metric ton, 2,200 pounds. Yes, Should we sing the song 16 tons? You know what they do in Canada? You know, if you say something is heavy, you say it weighs a ton. Well, that's the idiomatic expression, but what Canadian newspapers do now, what Canadian journals do now, is they use this stupid metric word. It weighs a ton. No, that is not an expression. But we got to be metric in everything. Canada will be renamed East China in the future, says Jonathan Paul. Half Coalition says, when will the CCP get Canada's maple syrup reserve? It exists. Tom Anderson says, I think we need to find a new name for the Asian murder hornet. That name sounds bigoted and racists. Choco King 666, when I hear these imbeciles clapping and banging pots at 7, I imagine they're doing it because Kevin is on, or alternately, they could be doing it here because I'm off the air. Matt Forney asks, are Americans the only ones standing up to this lockdown insanity? It seems like everyone else in the globe is letting the scientists abuse them. Actually, Sweden didn't go in for this. And so Sweden, which was beloved by progressives, suddenly became hated by progressives. Austria is opening up. Germany is opening up. Matt Forney says, to be fair, at least here in Albania, people are straight up ignoring the lockdown and the police aren't bothering to find them because they're sick of it too. Well, you saw the scarifying mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, and, you should take my word for it that she's scary looking because, I don't want to be responsible for, any shock-induced damage if you do a Google image search on her. So she went to speak to the black men and women of Chicago, telling them to get off the streets, and basically they told her to pound sand, that they're not going to listen to her. Huntington Beach, California, helicopters cruising the beach with a loud hailer telling people to go home. MCT says today is the 50th anniversary of the Kent State, Ohio shooting. Yeah, I remember that. And there was the Jackson State shooting, within a couple of weeks where 2 people were killed. And Tom Wolfe noted that when school or colleges reconvened that September in 1970, suddenly revolution was off the table, because what Kent State and Jackson State proved is that playing at revolution can get you killed. Half Galician says, Pepsi had a slogan in the early 90s, catch the wave. Matt Forney, the myth of the second virus is fed by the claim of a second wave ongoing in China. That's not a second wave. It's the same wave that started in January because the CPC lies about everything. Well, no, there's no transparency. To speak of them committing crimes against transparency, this is not something that exists in China. It doesn't exist, but we have to become, more like them, because we can't have misinformation. Let's see. Eternal Fisherman says, seriously, I may not agree with everything KMG says about the virus, but I do find it hilarious how certain experts never suffer from a decrease in trust by the mass media. Well, why isn't the mass media asking Dr. Fauci every day, is it true that you were responsible for the outsourcing of the creation of monster germs to the Wuhan lab, and you arranged through the National Institutes for Health for American taxpayer money for that? Because I rather think that if Americans knew this, then Dr. Fauci would be no longer as popular as he is. Don from Beyond says, lots of horrible invasive plants and vines from China quite wreck the natural landscape here in Florida, like kudzu and water hyacinth. Yeah, and I suppose the question is whether they are being accidentally or deliberately introduced. We have a problem with invasive fish in my country, and the evidence appears to be that it is being brought here deliberately because Chinese people who moved to Canada from China there's things that they miss about their homeland, such as their fish. You know, you hear all this talk about diversity, but no, what we're doing is creating it's a monostate. And yet the Chinese century has just started. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Manfred von Thistlebaum says they found a COVID case in France from December. What does this mean? Well, I've been saying this for weeks, that it's really obvious to me that COVID has been in my part of the world, British Columbia, and almost certainly Washington, Oregon, and California since December, at the latest. That they weren't testing for it. Apparently, it wasn't a serious problem. It couldn't spread. We know that people were getting sick. Lots and lots of people got sick from what they thought was the flu in December. There doesn't seem to be much interest in the testing. This isn't sherry. This is cold tea, which I drink without milk or sugar, Russian style. Metal Mike says Trudeau is the worst leader of any country ever. That's a bold claim, Mike. Okay. Let's go back. Yeah. Frank Bruni in the New York Times. She predicted the coronavirus. What does she foresee next? Does Donald Trump appear in this story? Well, it's Frank Bruni. This woman, the Cassandra, who predicted this catastrophe, her name is Lori Garrett, and she calls President Trump the most incompetent, foolhardy buffoon imaginable. Really? More so than Joe Biden? Because you keep hearing this about Donald Trump, that he can't speak properly. It's rather rough and ready, when he's speaking extempore, but compared to Joe Biden, who can't read off cue cards. And so this Cassandra, this reporter, how long is it going to last? She says. Not good. Not good. She saw it coming, so a big part of what I wanted to ask her was what she sees coming next. Steady yourself, her crystal ball is dark. There's a shocker. Despite the stock market swoon for it, remdesivir probably isn't our ticket out, she told me. It's not curative, she said, pointing out that the stronger claims so far are that it merely shortens the recovery of COVID-19 patients. We need either a cure or a vaccine. But she can't envision that vaccine any time in the next year, while COVID-19 will remain a crisis much longer than that. How do you know that, Frank Bruni? I've been telling everybody that my event horizon is about 36 months, and that's my best case scenario. All these stories are idiotic. If this lockdown, in the States with Democratic governors, if this continues into the summer, there's going to be civil war in these states. How do these people, we're going to shut down the economy until further notice. How are we going to get out of this? Money printer goes brrr. Yeah, that's their answer. Money printer goes brrr. And of course, just get totally inflate the economy with funny money, and that's not going to have any serious consequences. Obviously, the United States can get away with it better than other countries because they have the world's reserve currency, but my country has a very weak currency indeed. Curiously, there's actually talk in my country, I'll get to this later, we need immigration now more than ever. Can you imagine living in a country like that, where this has actually become a serious topic? We need immigration now more than ever. I'm quite certain this is going to go in waves, she says. It won't be a tsunami that comes across America all at once and then retreats all at once. It will be microwaves that shoot up in Des Moines and then in New Orleans and then in Houston and so on. And it's going to affect how people think about all kinds of things. They'll reevaluate the importance of travel. They'll reassess their use of mass transit. They'll revisit the need for face-to-face business meetings. They'll reappraise having their kids go to college out of state. Well, what about college in state? Doesn't that involve tens of thousands of people being close to each other? I mean, it just sounds impossibly risky, does it not? The New York Police Department chief says we are past the point of warnings when it comes to social distancing. You may have seen that footage of an NYPD cop beating the hell out of someone on the street the other day. This is from CBS New York. The NYPD is putting muscle behind Mayor Bill de Blasio's insistence that New Yorkers observe social distancing. Does it matter, what color your skin is? Because Bill de Blasio, as we all know, has been pushing for the longest time to have minorities released from prison. And just to not keep them in prison when they're charged, because apparently it's a racist justice system. Well, okay, are they going to be intersectional about this observing social distancing and the policing thereof? Oh, I just love this story. You might say it's no more Mr. Nice Guy. The NYPD will be out in force at parks, beaches, and playgrounds this weekend to make sure New Yorkers don't get up close and personal with each other. Yeah, that's going to do wonders for the police. Keeping society together depends, to a large extent, on people having respect for the police, for law enforcement, for the justice system. You can't go to the park or to the beach. Why not? Because you're all going to die. Oh, really? That's the position you're taking? You're going to stick with that one? The Z-Man has a depressing column today called Welcome to America. Every once in a while, one of the major polling outfits will ask Americans about their views on freedom and liberty. Most Americans think they live in the freest country on earth, and they are pretty happy about it. By freedom, people assume it means being able to go about your business as you see fit, holding whatever opinions you like, and saying what you like within the bounds of decency and common courtesy. Most of all, it means the government is not going to harass or torment you. There was a time when that was true. If you were over the age of 40, you remember when people were free from coercion regarding civil rights. People in this country were free to live their lives and speak their minds. For people of a certain age, it feels like it was not all that long ago, when even the most intolerant people would say, I may not agree with your opinions, but I'd fight to the death for your right to say them. No one says that anymore, as no one believes it, especially no one with power. In current year America, we ban books. The government does not ban books, but private companies refuse to sell them, so the effect is the same. Of course, almost all books are sold by one company now, a company that laughs at the laws and the political institutions that write those laws. If the people at Amazon decide your book is not to their liking, they will stop selling it. Now, the so-called conservatives will claim that major corporations like Amazon just avoid controversy. It's not about politics, but simply trying to avoid getting tangled up in controversial topics. Yet Amazon is happy to sell books on bizarre sexual predilections and the promotion of self-harm. That sort of material is not a problem because it is not a problem with the ruling class. Of course, people with unapproved opinions could sell their own books and magazines online, but the banks and payment processors refuse to do business with them. It's not just a few banks and payment processors that refuse to do business with people holding unapproved opinions. It's all of them. Sites like Countercurrents, VDare, and American Renaissance have searched far and wide for a payment processor, but no one will take their business. The banks behind the processors have decreed it. Maxwell Hare and John Kinsman were given 4 years in a New York penitentiary for the crime of being associated with Gavin McInnes. They were jumped by left-wing street thugs and won the fight. They were arrested, but there was never any effort to find the men who attacked them. There was no effort to find witnesses either. Instead, the police and court relied on material provided to them by Antifa. When he sentenced them, the judge made it clear he was doing this for their politics. This is not an isolated example. Over the last decade, this sort of thing has become so common that it's just an accepted part of daily reality. If you belong to a group holding unapproved ideas, you have to go to great lengths to meet in secret in order to avoid being attacked by state-sanctioned mobs. If that happens, there is a good chance the police will charge you rather than the mob. The thing political dissidents in current year America fear is that the government will become aware of them. There used to be a time when Americans associated this sort of thing with totalitarian states or South American dictatorships. The communists would never allow people to hold unapproved opinions. They smashed up illegal printing presses and banished dissident writers. Third world dictators sanctioned mobs to go around harassing people they saw as a problem. The communists are all gone, and there are no more South American strongmen. America is no longer a free country either. This reality should be evident to everyone now. Government has spent the better part of the last 2 months closing shops and forcing people to stay indoors. They are creating bizarre and ridiculous rules for when people must go outside. Cops are pushing people around, harassing mothers at parks, and otherwise carrying on like highly feminized goon squads. It's hard to claim you live in a free country when you need permission from the government to go outside to take a walk. The remarkable thing about this is none of the things described above would have seemed plausible a generation ago. Conservatives like to claim Bill Clinton was an autocrat, but no one seriously imagined he would do something like this. Left-wingers really thought that Bush was Hitler, but even they did not think this was possible. In what feels like the blink of an eye, things we used to think were outside the realm of possibility are now normal. We have slipped into the darkness. Now, I was talking about, apparently the elite, to the extent that they have a plan for returning to, creating what they dubbed the new normal. The plan is simply money, print, or go boom. Yeah, and how is that going to work out exactly? Jim Kunstler writes today, we are obviously watching money disappear. Your paycheck is gone. That activity you started, a brew pub, a gym, an ad agency, no longer produces revenue. The HR department at the giant company you work for told you don't bother coming into the office tomorrow or possibly ever again. Your bills are piling up. The numbers in your bank account run to zero. That sure smells like money disappearing. Wait until the pension checks and the SNAP cards mysteriously stop landing in the mailbox. There's going to be a lot of trouble. Ordinary Americans are going to get super pissed if money doesn't disappear from the stock markets too. They've seen this movie before. They will know for sure that they were played, that the class of people who hold most of the stocks are doing just fine, while everybody else stares into that old abyss staring back at them. I wouldn't want to be anywhere near the Hamptons on that fateful day. And they're just all so blithe about this. This is an unprecedented situation. Something like this has never happened in recorded history. Never happened. But I mentioned that there was one country that didn't succumb to the hysteria. And Fraser Nelson writes in The Spectator, Sweden has been the world's COVID-19 outlier, pursuing social distancing but rejecting mandatory lockdown. Schools, bars, and restaurants are open, albeit with strong voluntary social distancing compliance and streets that often look as empty as Britain's. Has this been enough? Sweden's public health agency has now published a study of its R number, a metric which the UK is using to judge the success of the lockdown. The UK objective is to push R below 1, which means it wants the number of new cases to fall. Last week, the UK's R number was estimated at 0.8, plus or minus 0.2 points, a figure described as an achievement of lockdown. But Sweden's reading is 0.85 with a smaller error margin. This raises an interesting question. Might voluntary lockdowns work just as well? And might they keep the virus at a manageable level with lower social and economic costs? The UK government has used modeling from Imperial College London, which makes some clear assumptions about lockdown. Imperial's graph shows its argument. Shielding voluntary social distancing, even school closures are shown to make very little difference to the spread of the virus, i.e. the R number. But lockdown, by contrast, is shown to be a game changer, with the R sinking immediately. But is it true? We don't know, because the R is notoriously difficult to pin down and not published in Britain. But Imperial also applied its UK assumptions to Sweden, warning that its rejection of lockdown was likely to leave the virus rampant with an R between 3 and 4. That is to say, every person infected would give it to 3 or 4 others. Its modeling envisaged Sweden paying a heavy price for its rejection of lockdown, with 40,000 COVID deaths by May the 1st and almost 100,000 by June. The latest figure for Sweden is 2,680 deaths, with daily deaths peaking a fortnight ago. So Imperial College's modeling, the same modeling used to inform the UK response, was wrong by an order of magnitude. Sweden has now published its own graph saying its R was never near the 4 that Imperial imagined. More importantly, its all-important R level has in fact been below the safe level of 1 for the last few weeks. As Johan Norberg has written, Imperial's model could only handle 2 scenarios: an enforced national lockdown or zero change in behavior. It had no way of computing Swedes who decided to socially distance voluntarily. But we did. Anders Tegnell, Sweden's state epidemiologist, has seen his trust rating soar. Some Swedes are even having his face tattooed on their arm. When Imperial first made its models, everyone was guessing. We know more now. Every day in the Spectator's COVID-19 email, we bring new studies that add more detail to our understanding of the virus. At present, Britain is considering the South Korean model, an ambitious combination of tech, surveillance, track, and trace. But given that Sweden achieved what Imperial College had thought undoable without their surveillance or the tech or the loss of liberty, its lessons are also worthy of consideration. For all its prominence in virus modeling, the R is not a known number. It can only be guessed at because the actual number of infections can only be guessed at. And I'm looking at a picture of Sir Patrick Vallance, who is a British government advisor, and he's at a lectern with that stupid slogan, "Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives," on it, like it's an accident scene. It's protect the NHS. This is absolutely Orwellian. That apparently Britons work for the NHS doesn't work for Britons. They demand to be worshipped. You must clap for us now. That's what the immigrants working for the NHS, they've made their video. And yes, they demand worship. Now, there's a strange thing going on in the media, which is that we are told that deviation from the narrative constitutes misinformation or disinformation that is literally deadly. And as such opinions must be suppressed. But the longer this goes on, the more we are actually seeing such dissenting opinions. And of course, the cult of the expert, I suppose, has reached its apotheosis. And this is from unheard.com. As he is careful to point out, Professor Michael Levitt is not an epidemiologist. He's a professor of structural biology at the Stanford School of Medicine and winner of the 2013 Nobel Prize for Chemistry for the development of multi-scale models for complex chemical systems. So I think that we can take it as a given that Professor Levitt is, in fact, an expert, that he is a science man. He's a numbers guy. Much of modern science is really about statistics, as his detractors never tire of pointing out. Professor Neil Ferguson is a theoretical physicist by training. With a purely statistical perspective, he has been paying close attention to the COVID-19 pandemic since January, when most of us were not even aware of it. He first spoke out in early February, when through analyzing the numbers of causes and deaths in Hubei province, he predicted with remarkable accuracy that the epidemic in that province would top out at about 3,250 deaths. His observation is a simple one, that in outbreak after outbreak of this disease, a similar mathematical pattern is observable regardless of government interventions. After about a 2-week exponential growth of cases and subsequently deaths, some kind of break kicks in and growth starts slowing down. The curve quickly becomes sub-exponential. This may seem like a technical distinction, but its implications are profound. The unmitigated scenarios modeled by, among others, Imperial College, and which tilted governments across the world into drastic action, relied on a presumption of continued exponential growth. That is, with a consistent R number of significantly above 1 and a consistent death rate, very quickly the majority of the population would be infected and a huge number of deaths would be recorded. But Professor Levitt's point is that that hasn't actually happened anywhere, even in countries that have been relatively relaxed in their responses. He takes specific issue with the Neil Ferguson paper. In a footnote to a table, it said, assuming exponential growth of 15% for 6 days, now I had looked at China and never seen exponential growth that wasn't decaying rapidly. The explanation for this flattening that we are used to is that social distancing and lockdowns have slowed the curve, but he is unconvinced. As he put it to me, in the subsequent examples to China, of South Korea, Iran, and Italy, the beginning of those epidemics showed a slowing down, and it was very hard for me to believe that these 3 countries could practice social distancing as well as China. He believes that both some degree of prior immunity and large numbers of asymptomatic cases are important factors. As far as asymptomatic cases go, there seems to be an effort going on to have the meat processing industry shut down. That'll show us, no more hamburgers for you peons. And we were told these horror stories about the large numbers of people who were affected in these plants. So what, we have thousands, tens of thousands of deaths, places like North Dakota? No, what do they have in North Dakota? 17 deaths, something like that, despite the very high numbers of people in these plants who have been infected. So he says, I think the policy of herd immunity is the right policy. I think Britain was on exactly the right track before they were fed wrong numbers, and they made a huge mistake. I see the standout winners as Germany and Sweden. They didn't practice too much lockdown, and they got enough people sick to get some herd immunity. I see the standout losers as countries like Austria, Australia, and Israel that had very strict lockdown but didn't have many cases. They have damaged their economies, caused massive social damage, damaged the educational year of their children, but not obtained any herd immunity. There is no doubt in my mind that we come back to look at this, the damage done by lockdown will exceed any savings of lives by a huge margin. And Professor John Ioannidis of Stanford, he appeared in the Times on Sunday, in the Sunday Times. Now, I suppose he is the leading skeptic, and his opinions are supposed to be radioactive, but there he is in the London Times. And he says lockdowns are no longer the right medicine. The science is becoming clear. But hey presto, this is from Medscape today. We find out that something bad happened to the professor from Stanford. That, I don't know, maybe he went a little funny in the head, or maybe he is just so determined to be a contrarian that nothing that he says can be taken seriously anymore. The story says, on COVID-19, a respected science watchdog raises eyebrows. Ioannidis became famous for a paper that he wrote in 2005, Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. This is the replication crisis. Let's see. Ioannidis' latest work, though, has sparked pushback from many of his colleagues, with some suggesting that the researcher may be succumbing to the very sloppiness he has spent his career fighting. Since mid-March, Ioannidis has been arguing that the fatality rate of COVID-19 may be much lower than initially feared, and that as a result, current public health restrictions could be overly strict. Last week, a Stanford-led study of COVID-19 infection rates in Santa Clara County, California, which lists Ioannidis as an author, seem to offer some of the most forceful backing for that argument. The paper suggests that the fatality rate for COVID-19 may be 0.2% or less, lower than many other estimates and much closer to the seasonal flu. In the past week, though, the Stanford study and a related effort in Los Angeles have come under fierce criticism from prominent statisticians and infectious disease experts. Critics have argued that statistical sloppiness, inaccuracies in testing, and a skewed survey method likely warped the results. Some critics have also expressed surprise that Ioannidis was involved in the Santa Clara study at all. My quick take is that something really odd is going on with Ioannidis, wrote Alexander Rubinstein, a geneticist and computational biologist at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He suggested that Ioannidis may simply be so attached to being the iconoclast that defies conventional wisdom that he's unintentionally doing horrible science. He added, pretty much no one with statistical acumen believes these studies. You mean like that Nobel Prize winner for chemistry that I was just mentioning a few minutes ago? I suppose there's the possibility that people get into a habit when they read things that they come across something that is not going to be sympathetic to their worldview, so they just ignore it. But am I supposed to believe that all of these people, like Professor Rubinstein, they don't know about all of the very prominent statisticians who have spoken out against the lockdown? I have to say it's very suspicious. New Zealand, which is its leader is a woman, a sad Muslim woman, I believe. Her name is Jacinda Ardern. And the world came to love her because of her response to shootings in Christchurch. Now apparently she's pulled off a miracle in New Zealand. But I'm looking at a letter here from a New Zealand journalist called Peter Drew. And it's an open letter to her. He says, there's a famous saying, the first casualty of war is the truth. Well, from what we're seeing around the world, the first casualty of a pandemic is not only the truth, but also rational thinking. That comment is directed at the COVID-19 situation in general rather than you. In times of crisis or potential crisis, emotion can be the enemy of truth and rational thinking, especially fear. There's been a huge amount of emotion and fear flowing across New Zealand and the entire world the last few weeks. This letter attempts to momentarily push the emotion to one side and focus on rational thinking linked to facts and evidence. Our country, as we know it, has been ripped apart in the blink of an eye, perhaps never to fully return. The economy and businesses decimated for the foreseeable future. Mental health problems and social problems set to explode with devastating consequences. The damage done is catastrophic. To inflict that onto the nation, there needs to be one heck of a good reason and one heck of a strong case to do that. There needs to be an extreme level of critical danger in order to inflict this level of damage to try to safeguard the nation. Alongside that, we absolutely must balance that with an understanding that hindsight is always 20/20. Well, Sweden dissented, Germany dissented to a certain degree. Austria is opening now. But I guess in the English language countries, there's really a race to be as harsh as possible. It's a campaign, And how do you know that it's working? Because people are suffering. That is how you measure it. Oh, yeah, let's talk about the brave new world we're about to enter. Coronavirus UK health passports possible in months. So we're going to actually have a system of documents necessary for internal travel. Golly, just like the Soviet Union. And just like, in those spy movies of yours. Papers, please. Boy, I'm really looking forward to that. Facial biometrics could be used it's from The Guardian, to help provide a digital certificate, sometimes known as an immunity passport, proving which workers have had COVID-19 is a possible way of easing the impact on the economy and businesses from ongoing physical distancing, even after the current lockdown measures are erased. How is that going to work exactly? Because, I'm walking down the street, and yesterday there was this couple, I guess man and woman, guess it must have been about my age. They saw me coming down the street, and they walked up a bunch of stairs. So, we wouldn't pass. And still to this day, people walking out into the street, oh, you can't, try to keep that social distancing, but I mean, it's just, and so the people with the immunity passports, are they going to be distinguished in some way? Some sort of star, a bright star, something like that, so that people will know that they're one of the good people that you can get close to, or reasonably close to, without, fear of dying horribly. The government is understood to be moving away from the phrase immunity passport as evidence continues to emerge on exactly how immunity develops after someone has had COVID-19. The World Health Organization, and we all trust them, don't we, has also issued a stark warning over attempts to give people false assurance through a passport scheme. On Monday, Boris Johnson will call on countries to come together in a truly global effort to defeat the coronavirus as he co-hosts a virtual coronavirus global response international pledging conference and confirms the UK's promise of £388 million funding for research into vaccines, tests, and treatment. Here's a piece from the Off Guardian, and there's Matt Hancock standing in front of that stupid lectern. Yesterday was May 1st, the deadline that UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock set for the NHS to be testing 100,000 people every 24 hours. Seeing as the 100,000 was just an arbitrary number set up for PR purposes to make the government look dynamic and proactive, whether or not they actually hit this target is moot. Nevertheless, steadfast in their duty to discuss only that which does not matter, the mainstream media are locked in a fierce debate over the statistics. One which not only buries the lead, but burns off its fingerprints and pulls out its teeth first. Some people claim the 122,000 tests is more than his promised 100,000 daily tests. Others point out that since those 122,000 tests were only on 73,000 people, he actually missed the target. Both are missing the point. The testing policy as a whole is producing potentially meaningless data. For example, the UK apparently just admitted to testing 50,000 people twice in one day. This is potentially significant because it's evidence to support the numerous anecdotal reports of patients being repeat tested for COVID-19 without ever getting a positive result and sometimes without displaying any symptoms. But it's also itself a symptom, a natural side effect of some very poor NHS advice. The latest version NHS guidance for managing COVID-19 says this about PCR tests. Beware false negative upper airway sample if clinical picture is typical. Clinicians are being advised that if they have a patient with typical symptoms of COVID-19, that any negative test could be a false negative and potentially disregarded. This might explain why doctors would want to redo some tests, but selectively ignoring negative results is a highly irresponsible policy, especially if you base those decisions on a typical clinical picture for a disease with a very common pattern of symptoms. The typical clinical presentation of COVID-19 is fever, cough, and shortness of breath. This is far too vague to be used to clinically diagnose anything and could obviously lead to thousands of patients with flu, colds, or other minor respiratory infections being listed as COVID-19 cases, either because they were tested for COVID-19 repeatedly until they got a positive result, or because they had their negative result dismissed as a false negative and were clinically diagnosed. Yes, and high numbers. We want high numbers. We want higher numbers. We want the highest numbers. And golly, we are going to get it. I was talking about censorship, and a famous person was censored over the weekend by YouTube. And Off Guardian has its roundup of COVID-19 news from The Guardian, which, of course, this is a great time for The Guardian. The Guardian is the paper of what the Guardianistas, the woke women, and they want to be scared. They want to be scared to death. So these are heady days. The Guardian has a story covering the campaign from two NGOs to have David Icke thrown off all social media platforms. intervene here to say that I think that David Icke is a loon. But, what do I care? He believes that the world is run by secret lizard people. That should give you a clue as to, how reliable David Icke is. But apparently we're not going to let people make those kind of decisions themselves. Well, the article is very long, and the various claims made by Icke and the D-list celebrities who agree with censoring the man, it goes into decidedly less detail on who funds the NGOs involved. It also disregards entirely the potential ethical problems posed by large, well-funded institutions campaigning for the censorship of an individual, and avoids any questioning of the idea of giant tech companies cooperating with the government to decide which options are allowed. This isn't about David Icke. This is about setting a precedent, censorship for the public good. The Center for Countering Digital Hate and Hope, Hope Not Hate, or the terrifying face of modern authoritarianism, fascism in the name of friendliness and safety. In one article, Simon Tisdale documents all the ways in which the lockdown-generated economic crash could destroy the lives of people in the third world. And in another, Polly Toynbee goes into great detail about all the unemployed young people we're about to create because of the lockdown. None of them argues the lockdown should be ended. In another article, Robert Reich says that Trump ending the lockdown would be terrible and dangerous and kill people, and Lloyd Green blames Trump for surging unemployment in the U.S. without mentioning the lockdown at all. You see, ending the lockdown is bad because Trump wants to do it. But also, the lockdown is causing massive unemployment both here and abroad, which could kill millions of people thanks to poverty, famine, and non-COVID diseases. Keeping the meat packing plants open is dangerous and irresponsible, but there are fears of panic buying or food shortages if they're closed. There's no word on the potential deaths caused by starvation and food shortages, which are discussed at length in other articles. In summary, we're told the lockdown's effect will kill literally 10 times more people than the disease has done so far. But if you want to end it, you're a pro-Trump, anti-science virus denier. And there's a bunch of news about Putin. He's still around, still as dangerous as ever. Oh, by claiming that the aid Russia delivered, the coronavirus aid delivered to Italy by Russia, was done partly for political purposes, the response, "No shit, Sherlock," comes to mind. Perhaps The Guardian genuinely thinks that when NATO countries deliver aid, they do it out of the kindness of their hearts, anonymously, without even a thought to geopolitics or public relations. Or maybe they'll say any rubbish they're told to say. The Guardian's opinion section is always a wonderful source of the truly absurdly shallow. While the coronavirus coverage totally neglects the arguments against the lockdown and experts dissenting from the consensus, they do have plenty of space for one novelist struggling in the lockdown, even though they wrote a book about self-isolation, and for a lady to ramble on about how she doesn't mind staying inside anymore. These are real, heartfelt thoughts and not all attempts to boost novel sales. The book is linked to 3 times, or just egomaniacal pat themselves on the back. Oh, don't forget, the murder hornets are coming soon, and I don't think there's no protection from the murder hornets. I think that they are, that's going to be it. That's going to be the end. Peter Hitchens tweets 2 days ago, or yesterday rather, the flu of 1968 to 1969 killed 80,000 in Britain, but there was no house arrest and the country didn't shut down. Perhaps the 1968 pandemic did not prompt a worldwide economic shutdown because the generation in power had a more sanguine article towards diseases. Reading so many of these pieces, these people have never heard about viruses before. And I'm thinking, what happens if they find out about bacteria? What? There's this other thing called bacteria, and we're covered in it, and everyone has it, and we're passing it to each other all the time? I just imagine the wailing, the screaming. It's terrifying to think of. Peter Hitchens is not happy with his countrymen. He wrote on the Mail on Sunday, "Why do I bother? For 6 weeks now, I've been saying that the government's policy on COVID-19 is a mistake. Most people do not agree with me, and many are angry with me for saying so. Others, bafflingly, don't care about the greatest crisis I've seen in my lifetime and regard the debate as a spectator sport." Let me say it again. The coronavirus is not as dangerous as claimed. Other comparable epidemics have taken place with far less fuss, and we have survived them. The death rate is lower than the government believed. It's past its peak in this country on April the 8th, well before the crazy measures introduced by the government on March the 23rd could possibly have affected matters. The actions we are taking against it are gravely out of proportion and will destroy the lives of thousands and the prosperity and health of millions. This is not life versus money, it is life versus life. It's not been much fun fighting this. In fact, it has been exhausting and dispiriting. I feel as if I am in a nightmare when I can see a terrible danger approaching, but when I cry out in warning, nobody can hear me. "Can't you see?" I yell in the dream. "If you don't defend your most basic freedom, the one to go lawfully where you wish, when you wish, then you will lose it forever." And that is not all you will lose. Look at the censorship of the internet spreading like a great dark blot, the death of Parliament, the conversion of the police into a state militia. Aren't you alarmed by the creation of a creepy cult of state worship celebrated every Thursday night in a country where church services and normal public gatherings are banned? When did you last hear an anti-government voice on the BBC, now little more than a servile state broadcaster? And then can you not see the strangling of the prosperity on which everything we hold dear is based? I mentioned the other day to a hardworking small business owner that a shop well known to me was down to 10% of its normal takings. "Lucky him," exclaimed the businessman. "I have had no income at all for weeks, and I have no hope of any. But I'm still having to pay my rent and power bills and interest on my loans." The country is having a gigantic self-inflicted heart attack and stroke combined. Heaven knows what sort of trembling, weakened shadow of its former self it will be when this is over. I think I can guarantee that it and we will need to take many doses of very bitter medicine for as far into the future as it is possible to see. And yet no help comes. The absurd, jocular Mr. Bumble, who we have chosen to be our national leader at this time, has no sense of urgency at all. As he stammers and brays and does his Churchill impression, it is clear that he has no serious plan to bring this nonsense to an end. But here's the problem for Mr. Bumble. He did not just panic himself, he spread fear far and wide. More than half the population have been literally scared silly. You meet them on the pathways and pavements, flinching with real alarm at the approach of another human being, as if bubonic plague were abroad. They genuinely fear to go back to normal life. Toby Young in Lockdown Skeptics, he is also not very happy with his countrymen. He leads with a story from The Observer. Fearful Britons insist don't open restaurants, schools, or stadiums. 67% of people think schools should remain closed, with only 17% who think they should reopen. Just 11% think it's time to reconsider reopening restaurants, with 78% against, while only 9% thinks pubs should open, with 81% against. When it comes to sporting events, 84% are against allowing mass gatherings to take place, with just 7% in favor. Unfortunately, that poll isn't an outlier. A YouGov poll for the Sunday Times found that just 25% of adults would feel safe returning to work, and the public opposes reopening schools by 48 to 28%. And 59% of people polled by the Sunday Express said they would not feel comfortable going out and don't plan to resume a normal life anytime soon. It's official. We are a nation of bedwetters. As Benjamin Franklin said, those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. But I guess Benjamin Franklin would be considered a dangerous radical today. And it isn't just us. In America, the lockdown zealots are on the march, having got the hashtag extend the lockdown trending on Twitter. New York Times journalist Taylor Lawrence has been banging the drum for this cause, tweeting, "The open up the economy people are truly the dumbest people on here. How do they think the economy will look when millions are dead and our hospitals are overwhelmed? If you want to save the economy, then you need to keep everyone alive. And since COVID-19 is a hydra-headed monster, 36 months, is that enough time? That's best case scenario. There's not going to be a Britain in 36 months. There's not going to be a Canada. There's not going to be a United States if this goes on. I suppose if Governor Cuomo is determined to destroy New York State, I don't know that there's much anyone can do to stop him. But you're already seeing, we already heard stories of people fleeing lockdown states to non-lockdown states. Toby Young writes, and I mentioned Professor Levitt. He says it's probably a good idea to watch Professor Levitt's interview ASAP because there's a risk YouTube will take it down. YouTube says it has clear policies prohibiting any content that disputes the existence and transmission of COVID-19 as described by the WHO and the NHS. So there you have it. And he has a quotation from Carl Jung in today's, oh yes, The Independent reports, Germany bans hymns. Yes, psychic epidemics. Christopher Booker, who I've spoken about on this live stream, 7 Basic Plots, talked about that a few weeks ago. Booker was a great admirer of Jung's. I highly recommend his book, The Neophiliacs, which is a Jungian interpretation of the revolutionary changes in Britain after the Second World War. But this is a quotation from Jung that Christopher Booker had in his book, Groupthink. Quote, "It is becoming more and more obvious that it is not starvation, it is not microbes, it is not cancer, but man himself who is his greatest danger, because he has no adequate protection against psychic epidemics, which are infinitely more devastating in their effect than the greatest natural catastrophes." As I mentioned previously, you see there was an attempt to bring out a psychic epidemic with global warming, climate change, climate emergency, climate extinction, whatever you want to call it. And you notice it got scarier and scarier, right? But it didn't work. People weren't buying it. Oh, apparently in 50 years or something, and by 2050, the temperature will have gone up 2 degrees Celsius. Yeah, that's quite the doomsday scenario you got there. But no, COVID-19 is much better because you're all going to die. We have to have dictatorship or else you're all going to die. And how long is the dictatorship going to last for? We can't say. It's better to be safe than sorry. And if it saves only one life, that's just, as I mentioned with regard to David Mamet, movie Spartan, you don't have to fake the DNA. You just have to issue a press release. Now, this is, I don't know, this is funny, but also not funny. The Independent leads with the news that the NHS is about to pilot its new coronavirus detector app, known as the NHSX, in the Isle of Wight. Matt Hancock is expected to announce that 141,000 of the residents of the island will be the first people in the country to test this new homegrown app. But why has the NHS developed its own contact tracing app rather than rely on the tried and tested approach developed by Apple and Google? According to a report in the Register, the British government has rejected the Apple-Google approach because the US tech giants protect their users' privacy too well. The Apple-Google approach is a tracing program that relies on users consenting to their phones being used for data collection without creating a hackable data pool. The NHS app, by contrast, automatically sends that information to a central database on state-owned servers that creates a honeypot for identity thieves. 2 concerns immediately spring to mind. First, if the app is being developed by the NHS, will it actually work? The NHS's efforts to develop its own computerized patient record system had to be abandoned in 2013 at a cost of nearly £10 billion to the taxpayers. Governments and government departments just have an enormous amount of difficulty now with large data for payroll systems. There was a similar scandal in Canada for government employees. That, oh, the system, I believe it was called Phoenix, just got more and more and more and more expensive, and I believe it was finally just abandoned. At yesterday's press conference briefing, Michael Gove said the British public must learn to live with restrictions on our movement for many months and would have to adapt to, wait for it, a new normal going forward. And it appears that Boris Johnson is in no hurry to let people know what his plan is, how long this business is going to go on. I mean, he had the disease himself, so, I mean, you can hardly disagree with him. Let's see, let's go back to the chat. I've had 3 F-150s, and they're solid, but like Toyotas now. Isn't that a good thing? Toyota's supposed to be a well-made car. I noticed years ago that the F-150 or pickup trucks in general were the only vehicles in North America that were still being marketed to men. That even with, roadsters, oh no, it's some good-looking young woman behind the wheel, because they're the people who buy roadsters. Roadsters being very uncomfortable cars to drive because your insides are constantly being slammed. You know, because you want the tight suspension so you can go faster, right? Frankly, I don't think that women are all that keen on roadsters. But, we wouldn't want to traffic in any sexual stereotypes. Yeah, Alberta is launching a tracking app, says Metal Mike, and I will get to that shortly. Because Jason Kenney has dictatorial powers there. Let's see, the fat man in the circus was like 200 pounds. That must have been a long time ago. Justin Proto says Marxism in any form is a mind virus. What's going on here is that, we're being blackmailed. We're being told, again, that the economy must be destroyed. Society must be destroyed. Because if we don't, something terrible is going to happen. Well, who says so? Well, Neil Ferguson of Imperial College London says so. You know how he got Sweden so terribly, terribly wrong by an order of magnitude? That he was talking about 2.2 million people dying in the United States? Well, they've topped 60,000, even with the juiced numbers. Maybe they'll get up to 100,000. That is a long way from 2.2 million. YT says, feeling down today about what's going on. Sometimes I still stop in my tracks in disbelief. Farms turned mass murder sites due to global supply chain issue. My income is down. Can't go on dates. Life held up. Well, if you look this up on Twitter, and I don't know that I recommend that you should, you make a complaint of that sort of thing, and people will tell you that you're pretty much a murderer. Because the Karens have decided that we're going to be locked down forever. The Karens are obviously still being paid because, if you run into anyone who says that you're being irresponsible for saying that the lockdown can't end until, further notice, just ask them the question, are you still being paid? Because that is the binary division. Now, that is the binary division. Okay, let's see. Let's go back. Oh, Megan Mertz is back in the news. Her lawsuit against the Daily Mail, not going well. Not going well at all. But now, according to the Mail, the Duchess of Sussex could relaunch a new version of her defunct lifestyle blog, The Tig. You excited for that? The Tig, which was launched in 2014, was the actress's personal blog in which she shared some of her favorite things, ranging from food and travel to fashion, beauty, and politics, and inspirational women with her fans. And now royal expert Mika Meyer predicted in the Royally Obsessed podcast that Meghan, who has moved to her hometown of LA with Harry and 11-month-old Archie. Do we know that for certain? Do we know that Archie is there? We don't really know anything that is known to be true about Archie. She could also open a new Instagram account after being forced to shut down the Sussex Royal account when they stepped down as senior royals. That when they stepped down as senior royals, I still don't really know what that means. You know, I think she's going to do a goop, like a new version of the Tig, and the goop is a reference to Gwyneth Paltrow, who is a beautiful woman who can act, which is a very rare thing. But some years ago, that Gwyneth Paltrow decided that she didn't want to act anymore. What she wanted to do was to attempt to become the most hated woman on earth. And now, Megan Mertz wants some of that action. I'm looking at a picture here of the Tig. What is this? New Year's resolution 2016. And Megan is she's walking, I don't know, this is a kind of wasteland, a frozen wasteland. It looks very icy indeed. But of course, she's wearing jeans with ripped knees because that's what you do when it is very cold and slippery. Those are clearly the type of trousers one would wear. I don't think Gwyneth Paltrow has anything to worry about. And here's some good news from the very mysterious DNYUZ website. For Disney, a stricken empire. Yes, the Devil Mouse is in big, big trouble. Its 14 theme parks are now padlocked. Its movie studios, there are 8, controlled a staggering 40% of the domestic box office last year. Now they're sitting at a near standstill. From great to good to bad to ugly, said Michael Nathanson, a leading media analyst. Recession will cause further pain. You have the mysterious stepping down of Bob Iger as a CEO. And Disney is scheduled to report quarterly results after the stock market closes. Analysts are expecting per share profits of 88 cents, down 45%. Disney has furloughed an estimated 100,000 employees, slashed executive pay up to 50%, and taken out a $5 billion line of credit to bolster its liquidity on top of $8.25 billion secured in March. Yeah, and Disney has been buying everything. It bought Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars. It owns The Simpsons now, National Geographic. It owns Hulu. Apparently, its streaming service is a big hit. But I don't know what people are saying, that there's not going to be any more movie theaters anymore. I don't know. It's possible that people could just wake up one morning and say, this is silly. Come on. We went to movie theaters. We went to football games. We went to hockey games for all those years. No one was scared. Why should people be scared now? Well, God willing, that's what happens. But, if the Karens stay in charge. So what is happening in my own country here of Canada, which is 38 million people? We have just under 60,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19 and 3,766 deaths. In Saskatchewan, with its 1.1 million, the number of deaths is stuck at 6. 433 cases. British Columbia, 2,171 cases and 114 deaths. That is in a province of 5.1 million people. And yes, Bonnie Henry had given her daily news conference. She announced 3 new deaths, so I guess the number is up to 117. But what is going on in Vancouver Island? How many cases do we have where I live, where things are locked down, or at least most of the businesses have been shuttered? No, I guess they're not going to give the actual number for Vancouver Island, because I guess it's kind of embarrassing. In the healthcare system, 428 health workers had tested positive for COVID-19 as of April 28th. Of those cases, 85% fully recovered from the virus. 33 healthcare workers had to be hospitalized, 13 of which required intensive care. 1 healthcare worker had died from COVID-19 as of April the 28th. Uh, there's a debate in Canada about these benefits that the government is giving out to all of these people. The Conservative leader, the opposition party leader, Andrew Scheer, says they are deterring Canadians from returning to work. I suppose he's got a point. You know, people are going to be paid to stay at home, and I suppose people have gotten used to staying at home. Some people more than others. I suppose there's a lot of people who just are going crazy right now. Oh, I mentioned Alberta, and the chief medical officer, her name is Dina, D-E-E-N-A, Dr. Dina Hinshaw. She says, I've already downloaded the app myself, and I encourage you to do so too. You know, in Canadian terms, that's practically a direct order when a government official says, I encourage you to do so too. This is the launch of AB Trace Together, a mobile app that uses Bluetooth technology to identify other nearby cell phones that also have the app installed. People with the app on their cell phones who later test positive for coronavirus will be asked to voluntarily upload encrypted data to Alberta Health Services contact tracers. Those tracers would then be able to use that information to track down people who had had close contact with the infected person. The faster Alberta Health Services contact tracers can inform exposed people or close contacts, the quicker we will be able to prevent potential outbreaks and identify when Albertans must self-isolate. You can aid in our work to keep Albertans healthy and provide crucial information about the spread of this dangerous illness. Yeah, okay. So we have a Green Party in Canada, and it holds seats, what, about 3 seats in the House of Commons? Fringe parties, if you want to call it, that's unfair. Okay, let's call them third parties. It's difficult for third parties to elect anyone in Canada. So the Green Party has made a breakthrough. They're part of the coalition government in British Columbia. But they're somewhat, how would I say, wonky, strange leader, Elizabeth May, is resigning. So there's a leadership campaign to replace her. Okay, so Glenn Murray is running. And Glenn Murray was a gay, he became Canada's most famous gay, or one of them. This is going back, what, to the 90s? He was mayor of Winnipeg, and he was, what, the foster father of some gay, some street kid. I mean, he's openly gay. This was found to be controversial. Then he moved to Ontario, was elected there, and became a cabinet minister in a Liberal government. Now he's running for the leadership of the Green Party. And he was asked about, I guess, intersectionality, you might say, although I don't believe that word was used. He says, I don't think age or race or skin color should matter, frankly. I think we're past sexism, ageism, and racism. So perhaps he was asked the question, why are you, a white man, running for the leadership of the Green Party? Well, fellow leadership contender Amita Kutner seized on Murray's comments, saying they go against the Green Party's culture of diversity. I was really surprised, she told the CBC. I don't really expect to hear someone say that nowadays. Kutner is a non-binary, mixed-race person who identifies with the pronouns they, them. Kutner expressed surprise at Murray's comments because he is a gay man who has been out for many years. Kutner said Murray's statement suggests that sexism, ageism, and racism no longer exist in Canadian politics. And she responded, we are certainly not past sexism, ageism, and racism. These issues are current and systemic in our nation, our politics, and all the parties, the Green Party included. So Glenn Murray responded, a reporter asked whether things like gender and age should be factors in choosing our leader. I said no. Greens fight against systemic discrimination, and it is very real today. No organization or person is beyond the reality of it, but as Greens, we take on that challenge as a mission. He said that he was responding to a question about his age and whether it will be an issue in a campaign against a slate of younger candidates. Murray said that he has been the victim of discrimination. And as a Toronto MPP, he defended New Canadians from systemic discrimination. Anna Marie Paul, a black woman also in the race for the Green Party leadership, said that although identity shouldn't matter when people vote, representation does. Canadian politics lacks diversity, Paul said. Does it now? Really? Because when I look at the cabinet ministers in Justin Trudeau's cabinet, they seem plenty diverse. To me, I don't think Murray's comments reflect an understanding of the continued barriers to participation. The comments display a profound misunderstanding about this issue. It's a level of understanding that is a dangerous one, considering the position he hopes to hold. What do I say to, is it Anna Marie? No, apparently it's Anna-me. Anna-me and Anita, I agree with you. I can understand how you interpreted it that way. Not only do I share your views, I will work very hard as a candidate alongside you to make sure that everything I'm doing is making you and everyone else in the party feel welcomed. See, essentially what these women are saying that you should drop out of the race because, you're a white male. Yeah, you're gay, but, come on. That doesn't count for much anymore. You should drop out of the race and, we should win because, we're not white and non-binary, So this is, the piece was written by David Thurton. He said some sort of race, gender columnist for the CBC. This is another example of the representation that doesn't, exist in Canada, apparently. Oh, yes. Okay, so Canada is being smashed by COVID-19 and the reaction to it. But the real question is, will Canada be as open to immigrants after COVID-19? Won't somebody please think of the immigrants? Any calls to limit newcomers must be met with logic. To expand the economy and pay the surging national debt, immigration is a core part of that plan. And this is by a woman called Senator Ratna Amivar, who was born in Amritsar, educated there, and she came to this country from Iran in 1981. And she has been telling Canadians what they must do and must not do for decades now, and was rewarded with a seat in the Senate. Unemployment in Canada is going to be running at, 25, 30, 40%? We have absolutely no need of immigrants. Zero. In fact, we should be sending people home, giving them money to go home. There is no evidence whatsoever that immigrants as a whole contribute to the Canadian economy. They are not a benefit. This has been proved again and again. But it doesn't make any difference because apparently, she's an expert. She's an expert in diversity. Seriously, she's been described as an expert in diversity. I guess, because she's a Hindu? That makes her an expert in diversity. Certainly, this question, she writes, will be a big one for Canadians, for governments to grapple with. Boy, the progressives sure love that word, grapple. The uproar over medical supplies we sent to China, which has since been repaid by the Chinese government, might be indicative of a battering down the hatches mentality. Many will want to keep our borders closed or extremely tightened, as President Trump did recently, temporarily banning immigration to the U.S. They will argue that the spread of pandemics has roots in the movement of people. You think so? Travel will become more restricted, health screenings will be enhanced, and there will be a growing push to limit newcomers out of fear of spreading disease. As someone who was an immigrant, no, you're still an immigrant, lady, and has worked on immigration issues my entire adult life, as a rent seeker, I am worried that this perspective will prevail. I can understand if it does. But can we afford less immigration? Yeah, can we afford less immigration? We lose money on every single immigrant, but we'll make it up in volume. Ah, let's talk about American politics. Let's talk about Joe Biden. You'll recall that a woman who used to work as an aide to Joe Biden, her name is Tara Reid, she claims a serious incident of sexual abuse occurred. And we're supposed to believe women, right? Believe women. You gotta believe women because women don't lie about things like that. 1 in 4, maybe more, you know. And but strangely enough, a lot of Democrats and a lot of progressive Democrats are not believing women or this woman. This is from the Daily Mail. Will and Grace star Deborah Messing is forced to delete tweets suggesting Joe Biden's sex accuser Tara Reid stole from a nonprofit after backlash. Reid called the actress out directly, telling her the post, which linked to a controversial blog post by Brian and Eddie Krasenstein, was slander and untrue. Others rushed to accuse Messing of shaming survivors after Reid spoke out. Gee, I wonder why a woman might be reluctant to come forward, one said. Messing's tweet read, Biden accuser Tara Reid allegedly stole from a nonprofit organization. Messing appears to have deleted the tweet as of Sunday, but she has continued to share tweets in support of Joe Biden throughout the day. Biden finally broke his silence about the allegation to deny it on Friday. Yes, there are now at least 4 people who have corroborated Reid's allegations. I don't know if that's exactly the right word, because what we're talking about here is the allegation or the assertion that she told people of this alleged attack, contemporaneously. Let's see. Just in case you try to delete this, you reprehensible fraud. This was directed at Deborah Messing. There's a lot of people out there who do not like Deborah Messing. She does not have a particularly good reputation. Journalist Katie Halper wrote, this has been debunked and you're quoting people who have been permanently banned from Twitter. Glenn Greenwald, also a journalist, added, gee, I wonder why a woman might be reluctant to come forward. The chairwoman of the Republican National Committee said, it has been appalling the hypocrisy as to how Brett Kavanaugh was treated versus Joe Biden. Brett Kavanaugh, every accuser was put on TV. It was wall-to-wall coverage. They went into his high school yearbook. They said they needed an FBI investigation. It went from me too, me too, me too to move on, move on, move on in a nanosecond because he's a Democrat and the hypocrisy is appalling. One Democratic strategist who requested anonymity told The Hill, we set up a standard we can't live by. No one likes to discuss it, but it's the reality. Yeah, you set up a standard you can't live by. Because believe women is a liar's charter and it is a blackmailer's charter. Not on all, obviously, not all women who make allegations of sexual assault are lying. But if they are all to be believed, and the people who the allegations are made against must be ruined, well, you can see the power that puts in the hands of women. So, yeah, things are kind of looking not so good for Joe Biden because, he's, 78 years old, and he's senile, and his skin looks like it's about to start unraveling from his face because it's been stretched so tight by repeated plastic surgeries that he can't even read off cue cards anymore. Lisa Bloom is the daughter of Gloria Allred, who has been one of the most annoying people in America for decades. And Lisa Bloom, well, she wanted to make her own mark. She wanted to become just as annoying as her mother, the lawyer, and she made it. She tweeted on May the 1st, I believe you, Tara Reid. You have people who remember you told them about this decades ago. We know he is handsy. You're not asking for money. You've obviously struggled mightily with this. I still have to fight Trump, so I will still support Joe. But I believe you, and I'm sorry. So there have been allegations. There were allegations against Trump that he was a sexual abuser. But what Lisa Bloom, leading feminist, is saying, yeah, okay, Joe Biden is a sexual abuser. Yeah, confirmed, as far as I'm concerned. But I'm going to support him anyway because there's a bigger issue here. You know, a bigger issue. Donald Trump. Of course, Lisa Bloom was providing consulting services to Harvey Weinstein just a couple of years ago, which proved to be, strangely enough, controversial. Someone resurrected a thread. Richard Armand Mills resurrected a thread from, 2.5 years ago, with just a bunch of video of Joe Biden being creepy with adult women, being creepy with adolescent children, being creepy with pre-adolescent children, and being creepy with babies. And I'm trying to imagine, a man, particularly a man of his years, sticking your nose, in a woman's ear and rubbing your forehead against their hair. Whispering something into her ear only to tell her, see you back home, I hope. Yes, there's just video after video. You can even hear Rish say, Dad's going to stand pretty close. Biden even jokes and said, if I was young. Yes, Biden seems to almost always to immediately inquire about the age of the girls he meets during these photo ops. He also has a habit of creepily saying, no serious guys till you're 31. Serious guys? The way he handles young girls is discomforting to watch. You can see it on their faces, and you can very clearly see it in their faces. A lot of the family members involved in these awkward moments don't know how to respond to Joe Biden preying on their young female relatives. Jeff Sessions, however, knows exactly what to do. Watch as he swats Biden's hand from touching his granddaughter. Wonder why he'd do that. Former VP Joe Biden doesn't just target little girls. Watch as he grabs onto the shoulder of Ashton Carter's wife, Stephanie, smelling her hair. She's clearly surprised by his awkward behavior. Yeah. No woman is safe from Joe Biden's creepy disposition, not even Hillary Clinton herself. Watch as he awkwardly embraces her for a particularly long amount of time. She keeps patting his arm as a gesture to let go, but he refuses. So there was a op-ed in the New York Times today from Elizabeth Bruning, who I believe was a Bernie supporter. But it's surprising because the New York Times has taken the position that it's a bigger issue here. It's Donald Trump. Democrats, it's time to consider a plan B. Tara Reade's allegations against Joe Biden demand action. She talks about the accusation of sexual abuse and the call to Larry King Live in 1993 from Tara Reade's mother, which is corroboration of a sort. This is collateral damage that Democrats who have spent the last few years championing the Me Too movement should be loath to incur. Democrats who subject Ms. Reade's allegations to a level of scrutiny not widely applied to accusers in similar circumstances, such as Christine Blasey Ford, who famously came forward during the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to allege that he had sexually accosted her in high school, to open up past and future cases to reproachful disregard. Feminist author Jessica Valente has emphasized the import of believing women even when it's politically inconvenient, and Rebecca Traister has observed that the credibility of Ms. Reade's allegations puts any female politician who might agree to join a Biden ticket in a poisonous bind. I'm sure Stacey Abrams won't mind. Pick me, pick me. I can hear her calling that. I can hear her calling right now. Donald Trump is having some fun with his old enemy, Joe Scarborough, and let's see, Joe's new wife, or fairly recently new wife, Mika Brzezinski. There was an intern, a pretty young intern in her 20s, who was found dead in his office, Scarborough's office, when he was a congressman from Florida. He quit. He quit Congress very strangely. He was 5 months into a new term and said that he wanted to spend more time with his children. If a woman tells me that she quit a job to spend more time with her children, I would tend to believe her. But when a man says that, no, sorry. Something happened. Somebody's got something on you, or you've agreed to leave, before something is revealed. So Trump said that Comcast should open up a long overdue Florida cold case against psycho Joe Scarborough. I know him and crazy Mika well, used them beautifully in the last election, dumped them nicely, and will state on the record that he is nuts. Besides, bad ratings. Hashtag open Joe cold case. Scarborough responded, "You are not well. Let Mike Pence work with Michael Fauci, work with Dr. Birx." Well, Mike Pence, he's in favor of electroshocking homosexuals. But now, of course, oh, yeah, that sensible Mike Pence. He's just, come on. Trump is woo. But Mike Pence, solid guy. Absolutely solid. And Trump also took aim at George W. Bush because Bush had engaged in this mealy-mouthed exercise talking about unity. It's all about unity. We rise or fall together. In the final analysis, we are not partisan combatants. We are human beings, equally vulnerable and equally wonderful in the sight of God. Yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, George, Bush is just going to forget of the coup attempt, of the Obama, DOJ, FBI, CIA coup attempt, the treason by these people against the duly elected president of the United States, because, he's just going to rise above that. It's funny how people on our side always have to rise above it, that the people on the other side never have to rise above it, that they regard that sort of thing as contemptible weakness, but somehow it's required of us. And in some good news, Trump issued an executive order on May the 1st on securing the United States bulk power system. That Trump says that foreign adversaries are increasingly creating and exploiting vulnerabilities in the United States bulk power system, which provides the electricity that supports our national defense, vital emergency services, critical infrastructure, economy, and way of life. That this is another piece of the infrastructure that the United States decided that now we can let foreigners control all of this. Because why would we need to have security over our bulk electrical system? But Trump is moving to take this back. And hang on, is this the last one? No, I got something good for the end here. Canadians write about American politics, but they don't seem to know very much about it. Strong third-party candidate for U.S. president rattles nervous anti-Trumpers. This is Keith Boag. And who would that strong third-party candidate be? Well, that would be Justin Amash. And I'm sure his business connections to China, they make him, very formidable at this time. Libertarianism has no political support in the United States. It has no political support anywhere in the world. We're looking at 1 to 3% of people who like that mix, of what they used to call economic conservatism and social liberalism. They said 1 to 3% consistently. That's the number of people who express approval of that. And yeah, my final story for the day, it's a happy story. You remember hearing about the U.S. women's soccer team? Sure you do. You never paid any attention to women's soccer. But these feisty ladies, and they're gender liquid or whatever, They're not your conventional. Well, actually, they are conventional women's soccer players, like Rapinoe, Megan Rapinoe. She was interviewing. She did an interview with Joe Biden because she's a soccer player, and there's like 2 countries in the world which take women's soccer seriously, to the extent there's any kind of organization, and those countries are Canada and the United States. And Canada and the United States are always, they're always at the top, because in the rest of the world, nobody cares. Soccer is a very popular game around the world, but it's male soccer that's popular. The United States women's football team's bid for equal pay has been dismissed by a court. The lawsuit was filed by 28 women's national team players last year against the U.S. Soccer Federation, and they had been seeking $66 million in damages under the Equal Pay Act. Molly Levinson, the player's spokeswoman, said that they plan to appeal. "We are shocked and disappointed," she said. "We will not give up our hard work for equal pay. We are confident in our case and steadfast in our commitment to ensuring that girls and women who play this sport will not be valued as lesser just because of their gender." Joe Biden, the presumptive Democratic nominee for U.S. president in the year's election, told the team to not give up this fight, adding, "This is not over yet. To U.S. soccer, equal pay now, or else when I'm president, you can go elsewhere for World Cup funding." Ooh, pretty scary. So you want to know why the women's suit was rejected? I'm going to read from the ruling of federal judge Gary Klausner. Quote, "The women's team has been paid more on both a cumulative and an average per game basis than the men's team over the class period." Unquote. They were getting paid more than the men. Now, I like this. There's kind of a background here about soccer, which I suppose would be useful to people who knows nothing about soccer around the world. That the U.S. team won the Women's World Cup last summer for the 4th title overall. They've also won 5 Olympic gold medals. And there's always a reference to the last time the male players, yes, the U.S. men's team made the World Cup quarterfinals in 2002, while their best finish was 3rd place in the inaugural tournament in 1930. And there's a reason for that, which is that the rest of the world outside North America is fanatical about soccer and not fanatical about men's soccer in North America. We have our own games, football, baseball, hockey, etc. But no. So competition is tough. It's not for the women's players because, as I say, Canada and the United States, and that's pretty much it. So I've left you with a good news story to end the day. I will go back to the chat finally. Manfred von Tisselbaum, they say kids are virtually immune to this thing. Well, they are. I've seen the numbers. William Hicks says, "I started watching a video via Zero Hedge of a guy who filmed himself getting stung by the murder hornet. It was 17 minutes long, but started with him crying out, 'The pain, that was enough.'" I don't have a lot of experience with this. I was stung by a wasp, I remember, when I was in high school. It was shockingly painful, or so it seemed to me. Chokinkin 666 says, "I see this as a continuation or next phase of the deindustrialization of the 80s. That was the transition from industrial capitalism to finance capitalism." Yes, quite right. Mr. Dissident, "Children should be screened but not heard." Reg Caesar. I guess that's a comment from Steve Saylor's site. I haven't been reading Steve Saylor for several months because he went all in on the Greg Cochran "we're all going to die" line. And I thought, no, it's just none of this makes any sense. It's wholly disproportionate. And again, it doesn't seem to be, it doesn't follow. Something terrible might happen. Something unforeseen and new might happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to smash everything. That doesn't strike me as being something that the sane people do. And finally, are people drinking during the chat, during the show? I get the impression there's a lot of people who are just getting drunk every day now, which is not good for one's health. Been stung by bees many times. There was a particularly a funny episode of King of the Hill when Dale was going to make this business out of bee stings, that bee stings were great for your immune system. And he managed to convince these women, these AWFL women, to get bee stings for, decent amount of money. But then he decided that he was going to treat himself with bee stings, and he got his arm swelled up so much that when it got slammed in a car door, he didn't mention at first, but then it was hanging at a weird angle. But Dale was always doing things like that. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. Oh, Josh Randall says, I'm so trashed, it's a miracle I can type. A stone miracle, I tell you. Again, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you'd like to support the show, my PayPal address is kevin_grace@hotmail.com, and I will leave you with my now traditional benediction and farewell. In these totally atomized times, I hope that all of you find some genuine human companionship. Good night.